Hey there, good people, and welcome to another episode of the Finnovator podcast. With me, Stewart, a business coach, founder of Adaria Coaching Consulting, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Firstly, I just want to say thanks to those of you who have been listening to this podcast for a while. I know there's been a bit of a gap in episodes recently, and a lot of that boils down to the fact that, like a lot of people, post-COVID, I found myself having sort of homeschooled two young kids, which was a joy and a pleasure and an opportunity to spend more time with the family, but also, man, it really took it out of myself and Rachel. I found myself kind of asking some questions about what I wanted to do, and I think one of the ways that I dealt with that is to take a little bit of time out from things that weren't just direct core parts of my business, and the podcast kind of suffered a bit as a result of that. But I'm happy to say that that time away has given me this extra enthusiasm for making this something that I do with even more energy and even more focus this year. We've already got some great guests lined up, which you're going to see in upcoming episodes. And again, I want to thank you very much for the feedback I've had from people, and in particular, those of you who've given me a nudge on the shoulder and said, hey, come on, how about some more episodes along the way? And with that in mind, what I wanted to do, as well as the interviews with guests, is I wanted to take an opportunity every now and again to share a little bit of insight into sort of topical areas that we're experimenting with, or I'm experimenting with as a coach, and some insights that I'm getting as a result of the coaching that I do with practices that I wanted to share to give you a sense of where things are changing and how certain businesses are doing things differently. And in this blog, I really wanted to share, or this podcast, I really wanted to talk a little bit about a topic that I think has become very, very popular recently, which is AI tools, and in particular Chat GPT, which is kind of like the Hoover of AI tools. We kind of know AI as Chat GPT. It's an interesting brand on its own. Now, before I go anywhere near it, I've got to admit that I've really deliberately steered clear of commenting on this as a topic up till now. And to be honest, the reason for it mainly because I try to avoid jumping on bandwagons the moment they roll past. And sometimes it does feel at times that the latest shiny thing comes out. You get a wave of consultants and marketers and salespeople appear, and they're kind of madly presenting this as being the solution to all our problems, the best thing since sliced cheese. And I know those of you who've been around long enough to experiment and see the different phases of technology and fintech will know that sometimes the promises made up front aren't necessarily where things go. And I'm talking about things like, AI-driven plan production. We're talking about client portals and a lot of the budgeting tools that came out there, which were intended to unlock, financial engagement with clients. And in the end, we know that isn't what happened. Chatbots are another really interesting example that I know I experimented with some years ago, and ultimately, these tools have failed to provide the utility that has been promised. And I go as far to say sometimes, and I count myself in this, sometimes they can end up distracting you away from things that really matter, things that you need to do, and things that are actually going to deliver results for you. And that's why I've taken my time in jumping in and wanting to talk deeply about ChatGPT. But I've been experimenting for a few months now. And I've actually found, I think, several applications which I think are relevant to practices in terms of what they do, where there is a real value in getting involved in this. So before I do, I want to sort of share what I've learned about the best way to use ChatGPT, how to get results, and also, the mistakes that sometimes people make, which I call the musts and the do nots. The first and most important lesson I've learned is that the quality of the output that you're going to get out of an AI tool is going to be directly influenced by the quality of your input. When I started using it, I would put in, like many people, vague instructions, like write me a blog on financial planning, and almost guaranteed the quality of the output that was coming back was similarly vague and similarly generic and similarly unimpressive. So, however, when I found myself investing more and more time to defining clearly what I want, some of the results have actually been pretty impressive. I'll give you one example, and there's a whole bunch of examples out there. So when I first started using ChatGPT, one of my commands might be such along the lines of copy edit this transcription for me. So I'd grab one of my webinars that I'd recorded, and I would get the transcription, which is automatically available through our members site, and I'd pop it in there, copy edit the following transcription, and what I get back was variable, let's say that much. Now, sort of after playing with this tool and understanding a little bit more about what I do, that instruction would look more like, can you please proofread this transcript for me, making changes that align with Australian English grammatical standards, and ensure it's written in a friendly, informal, and personal tone. Write it as if you were me. By the way, that "as if you are" is a great way of priming ChatGPT. As if you were me having a one-on-one conversation with the listener or the reader. Additionally, I'd like you to suggest formatting improvements for better readability, such as headings and section headings and other things like that to break up the text. And what I get back by taking some time to input or think about really clearly, closing down those parameters and being very specific is a much better result. Albeit, there's always an interesting one where you ask the AI to write with Australian English grammatical standards, and you end up with a text that's full of "g'day mates" and "shove another shrimp on the barbie." So, yeah, it can overdo it a little bit. It's interesting, and I guess this is another or another sort of podcast which I'm going to create. Is what we've then done is we've taken some of these commands that we know have worked, and we've put them into our canned response library, which is a tool that runs through our browser and also just on people's desktops, where we can use shortcodes to pull up everything from email templates to document templates to, even things like our ABN number. You just put in a shortcode and away it comes. And when we get a ChatGPT command that works, we will grab it, we'll pop it in there. So therefore, the next time I need it to copy, edit a blog, or create a covering letter for an email, or create a social media snippet, I can just pop in GPT social post as a shortcut, and bang, that command drops in. So that's been really useful. Another thing, and I think it's been covered, anybody who's done a bit of reading into this will know what I'm about to say. And it's understanding that while ChatGPT definitely talks a good game, the output can vary from being slightly inaccurate to just being completely downright false. For example, most recently I was using it to summarize a webinar transcript into chapters, and it literally, I put in the chapter 1, put in the next chapter, it did chapter 3, and I actually had to come back and go, hey, what happened to chapter 2? And sure enough, it went, oh, sorry, I missed out chapter 2. So you've still got to be on your game and watching out for it, all the way to really crazy misconceptions, like when it told me that I think Brazil had won the 2018 World Cup. So yeah, I guess the point here is that if you're planning to rely on ChatGPT as a source of truth, the verifying and fact-checking of information is absolutely important, because the tool is a long way from being infallible at this point in time. And I think this gets to the heart of, if I personally had to describe what I think ChatGPT can do for practices, the simplest way for me is to say that what it can do is remove 80% of the grunt work, which I describe as the work that is to flesh out tasks. Now, this is just my opinion, and this is just my experience of how I've used it and how I've been sort of helping my clients use it. But when I think about the scope of a task as it integrates with ChatGPT, I break it into 3 parts. That first 10% is coming up with the concept of what you want it to do or what you want to achieve. A good example for me is sitting down, if you're using it for marketing, and working out what the topics you're going to choose as blog posts or video blogs or whatever it might be. Now, I personally think you sitting down and doing it is going to be a much better way of approaching it, rather than putting into a command saying, can you suggest 10 blog titles to write on cash flow? Because frankly, you have a knowledge of your clients, and if you've done the avatar work, if you've done your value proposition, if you understand deeply what your particular client and markets are looking for, you are going to be able to come up with a much better idea than just asking ChatGPT, who doesn't have that information. So that's the first 10%, sitting down and working out what you want to do, kind of like scoping the ideas. The middle percent, which is what I call the grunt work, this is the 80%, right? This is stuff like the laborious copy editing, grammar checking, formatting, and a host of those other tasks that, frankly, you might often be too busy, sometimes too distracted, or often, as is the case for me, you don't have the attention for detail to do consistently well. That's what I meant by the grunt work. And it does this really, really quickly, and in many cases with greater accuracy, certainly than someone like me. And the final 10% is what I call it's the reviewing the work, refining it to ensure it sounds, it's accurate, fact-checking. If you're using it for marketing, that it sounds genuine, it sounds like your voice, it's aligned to your personal style, polishing out the product, to a point where whatever you're putting out, whether it's an email to a client, whether it's marketing, whether it's processes that you're putting into your operations manual, that you're comfortable to put your name on it and represent it as being something that you have co-created. So as I said, from my perspective, ChatGPT is the tool that really crunches down that middle 80% and can turn a task that might take 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever, into something which is done in a fraction of that time. So you can focus on the front 10% and the last 10%. So that's the high level overview. So let me jump into the practical sides. These are some of the practical uses and cases that I've personally discovered for ChatGPT when it comes to practice operations. Writing how-to guides is probably the first one I mention. As you know, if we've done some work together, building systems, processes, and equally turning that into a training resource that your team can access is one of the key things that most practices need to do to break through that barrier of having to train everybody you bring on board on the job training. And particularly important if you're going to start to outsource. ChatGPT can actually provide step-by-step instructions of the kind you would put in your operations manual. For example, I asked it to create a guide, a step-by-step guide for putting client information into Xplan, which for those of you who are outside of Australia, Xplan is a software tool used by a company called Iris. It's specifically a financial planning tool. And it did so really quite commendably. I've also used it to give me guidance on the best structure for a landing page. I've used it to write a guide on how to conduct a keyword research and a host of other things that I wanted to do for me, but I didn't have the time to sit down and write every single step involved, or clean up processes that I'd kind of dictated, but never got around to kind of formatting correctly. So absolutely very useful for taking the grunt work out of writing down the how to do things and directing people. It's obviously really good for summarizing meetings. And as someone who thinks that dictation is one of the fastest routes to build efficiency in what you do, I also recognize that when you've got this raw transcript output filled with grammatical errors and ums and ahs and all that sort of stuff and lacking the structure, it can be really hard to work with and time-consuming to fix. ChatGPT can really excel at grabbing a transcript and organizing it into a user-friendly format, removing all of the glottal stops and all those other things that characterize the spoken word, and then put it into user-friendly formats with bullet points, headings, summarizing key points, action items, and decisions made to provide the start of a decent file. And for those of you who have been using tools like Otter and Laxis, you'll know that this is where these transcription tools are doing. They're going to a space where you can either record an audio note or record a whole meeting, and the AI will then analyze it and create a summarization of it. Transcription, obviously, if you need long-form content that's been created either via a podcast, for example, or a webinar, or simply you've just recorded the whole meeting, it can actually take that and make the whole thing very readable and can do it relatively quickly. Obviously, there's word limits in there, but yeah, it's doing a pretty good job. Writing emails. It's also a really quick way to obtain first drafts of emails for various purposes, which you can then tweak for your specific situation. Or you can grab an existing email or existing piece of content, client comms, and ask it to rewrite it in a completely different way. One of my most enjoyable experiments was I asked it to take some of our program communications and rewrite it as Kermit the Frog, which was entertaining, let's just say the least. It's also very good at summarizing long-form content. One of my favorite prompts that I've learned along the way is TLDR. If you put in TLDR and then put the text after it, it stands for too long, don't read. And it basically applies an algorithm or an approach to the text you provided to condense it into the smallest possible form it can take whilst losing none of the context or meaning for quick consumption. Even if you're not using that prompt for, specifically, it's still possible to grab lengthy reports, research papers, and have them summarized in executive summaries so you can grasp the main points quickly. I actually used it to summarize a couple of books. I wanted to know if a particular book was worth reading. So I asked it to just summarize the whole thing, and it did so pretty quickly and gave me a sense of whether that book was what I was interested in, which interestingly begs some questions. How much AI is going to impact some of these book summary offerings out there? And yeah, that's another business model that must be very much under attack right now. Interesting, I haven't applied it to any ASIC publication. So maybe one of you listening can go and grab one of the RG papers that are put out by ASIC and see if it does a pretty good job on that. Could be a really good way of keeping up with papers that would otherwise be quite long-winded to read. SEO and keyword optimization is another area. It's really good. And traditionally, this is work that really could eat up hours. And for those of you who've maybe been doing SEO and website optimization from way back, you'll know that there was a time when it was quite costly, quite expensive. And I think assuming you've done the work up front to identify, what keywords you want to target, Chat GPT can not only provide suggestions, but it can also optimize website content for search engines. It can produce meta descriptions based on those keywords. There's things you put in with your blogs and tags, and it can even, as I said, go out and suggest additional keywords. So, for example, one of the things I've found that's really useful is taking some of this blog content we're producing, optimizing it for keywords, doing all of that stuff that otherwise would fall through the cracks. So when we put it onto the website, bingo, we're capturing that Google search traffic when it comes through. I found it actually really useful for explaining sort of concepts in really simple terms. I think when you know a lot about a topic, if you call yourself an expert or whether you don't, sometimes explaining complex topics in really simple language, it can be challenging, it can be tricky. And I think Chat GPT, when you ask it to explain something, it can give you kind of a layperson's perspective and then make it easier for you to kind of come back to the ground floor of meaning and then add in your own flair for explaining topics in a bit more of an accessible, understandable manner, but having that basis for understanding that, okay, so that's the simplification of it, and it gives you that structure. ChatGPT is very good for providing structure, particularly if you're someone who has so many ideas floating around your head. It gives you the structure, and then you can put your things in the right place. I'm actually going through a process of taking some of our webinars and rewriting them as short, very easily digestible books, and ChatGPT has been really useful for that. It is also useful for quick and dirty research. Now, as we speak, as I record this right now, ChatGPT, I believe, has got a beta testing where it has limited access to the internet. But prior to that, its access to information sort of doesn't give you any information that wasn't available pre-2021. But it can still assist in streamlining research. In one case, I wanted to put together a webinar on the referral process, and I asked it to go out and find me 30 specific white papers that had specifically been done in the last 5 to 7 years on this topic of referrals for advice businesses or accounting businesses or brokers. And it came back with a whole bunch of papers which had been done by various corporations. There were some in there that were done by research houses. There were some that had been done by universities, drawing from sources worldwide. Now, whilst not all of them were still relevant or available, frankly, it still turned over a bunch of stones that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to look through. Again, it did 80% of the searching so that I could just focus on the 10% of looking for the content that I thought was relevant, finding the ones that I wanted, and really integrating into what I was presenting. And the final thing I want to mention is coding. I know tech professionals have been some of the people to jump on it or been most vocal about its capability to do this, because it is really good at doing all sorts of codey things. At a less technical level, though, it can also help with simple tasks like a really crafty or tricky Excel formula, or creating a simple script for Google Sheets, or just doing calculations that maybe some of us out there haven't actually done without a calculator, or maybe haven't done at all since our last maths class. So again, mathematically, it can be a really good tool for just checking stuff, but also running through some calculations and creating some simple codes. So these are just a few examples, and I think undoubtedly more are going to become apparent as we kind of we see where this leap forward is taking us. Already, I'm seeing it integrated into the tools that we already have. Typedesk, I've mentioned, which is our canned messages tool, now has the ability to highlight something on a web page and ask ChatGPT via an API to rephrase it or summarize it. We've already got our members site has now got a chat a widget, a plugin, where you can go in there and ask a question. It will search through all of our video content and give you the answer. Where's this tool? What's the best way to do value propositions? Can you give me an example of, the best the scripting to have a conversation with clients about fee increases? It will, and if it's in the recording, if it's in the video recording, if it's in the transcription, it can report on it, which is really exciting. And there's a whole bunch of other areas there. Interestingly, recently my father-in-law came over to have Sunday lunch. He is a retired chef, and he was the kind of chef who would cook for not just a few people, but hundreds of people. Wedding receptions, large-scale parties. I think he once hosted Madonna, one of her album releases. I think it was back in the 90s. And I took him through this to show him a bit of what it was all about. And one of the things I asked Chat GPT to do is to create a banquet menu for 600 people in Sydney in June, and it had to do it at a cost that was under $20 per plate. And I wanted to provide the specific timeline, the agenda by which when people would eat and when the wait staff would clear the plates and all of that sort of stuff. And after the first version it did was very plain, and he said, look, that's not a great menu, that's pretty basic. So I went in and said, can you make it a bit more fancy? And what came out was he was pretty impressed with. It also had everything, including how much the produce that needed to be bought in what quantities. And again, it gave this schedule of what time food had to go in and out. And at that point, he turned to me and said, that's amazing. I can't work out if I retired just at just the right time, or whether or not I should have stuck around longer and seen my job get that little bit more easy. And I think this is the interesting thing about where we're going. There are signs that I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, and there's a lot of people who are similarly on the other side are saying it's the best thing since sliced cheese. One group are like, this is the end of 90% of jobs, and other people are saying, this is one of the tools that is going to free people up from mundanity and a lot of the things that chew up this time. So, we can focus on those problems that humans tend to be so far better equipped for. But I think it's we're still at very much the frontier. And whilst I wouldn't personally recommend making a tool like Chat GPT the center of your business quite yet, the early signs for me are there that it's something that can really help expedite tasks that I think humans just generally take considerably longer, or we're just not wired to do well. Or for me personally, like copy editing, I'll just miss it every single time. Chat GPT won't. There's obviously the energy issue to solve, though. Chat GPT and AI tools, if they continue their current implementation time cycle, they're going to draw, they reckon, estimates of 5 times the electricity. They're going to require 5 times the electricity input of current technology or current computer powering. So there's a massive increase in computing power that is potentially in front of us compared to humans, who we can generally sit down in the morning and solve some pretty meaty, creative problems on nothing more than a cup of coffee and a piece of toast. But for here and now, it's an interesting space. I'm certainly finding some very practical uses for it, and I have no doubt over the next few years that we will find more and more. I hope this has been useful. I wanted to share a bit. Stay tuned for more episodes of The Finnovator. And as always, if you are someone who has a story to tell, if you're someone who is running a particularly interesting business, or you're a subject matter expert who works with practice owners, and you'd like to have a conversation and tell us a bit about your story and where you come from, please reach out. I'm looking to speak to people all over the world from various different areas and nooks and crannies of our industry, and it's always great to hear what people are doing. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week, and thanks again for listening. Speak to you soon.